Good evening, good morning, good night, or whatever. Charles and I are back a few days late because we had, or I had rather, microphone problems when I was up north. I have a theory what caused it, but we'll leave that for later. Charles is back in New York, and I call upon you, Sir Charles. How are you today?
Well, I'm very pleased to be here on the one hand, but reflective in that it is the 22nd anniversary of the dread events that occurred here in the city and in the Northeast in America and around the world on September 11th, 2001. And I remember at the time, it was actually a sober period of great unity, that national differences just disappeared, racial, ethnic conflict disappeared, and we were united as a country. And at the time, I remember people saying that this won't last forever, that in time, people will forget about this and will begin to fail to appreciate the severity and the implications of what had happened back then. And sure enough, 22 years later, for the first time, an American president, Joe Biden, who at this point is, I would argue, a president in name only. He's a husk of a man with his mind barely functioning, decided he'd rather go to some G20 summit and stop in Alaska, and he doesn't have time for the people in the Northeast to really sincerely think through what had happened or appreciate how badly United States standing has fallen ever since. Under Republican and Democrat presidents, we've been in wars that made no sense. We have rushed out of places where we were, in like Afghanistan, I call it Afghanistan, and left allies wondering what the exercise was all about, left the Afghani people in far worse shape than they were prior to September 2001. And it seems that in theater after theater, America has lost our way, again, under both parties, whether it's Republicans in name only, Democrats, progressives. We have the most expensive government on earth, in theory, the most powerful military on earth. And instead of using these resources to benefit the truly vulnerable in our country and elsewhere, we have messes everywhere.
I guess we could say also the most indebted government in the world. I read somewhere that this year's deficit is going to tip 2 trillion. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And, you know, it's not just the level of government debt. If you go back to before 1970, the American consumer didn't use credit cards and didn't have car loans and didn't spend with abandon the way we do. So the total debt in this nation of spendthrifts is astronomically high. At the same time, we're cutting back on the private sector, cutting back on the arguments to invest in businesses in the private sector inside the U.S. How are we going to shoulder the interest burden, let alone repay the principal on all these debts? Not with a wacko president, not instilling violence, open borders. That's not the way we're going to do it.
We'll get back to the stumbling, mumbling, so-called president in a minute or two, but let's reflect a little bit. What is your opinion? Where did it all go wrong? I'd like to hear your opinion on the Iraq war. The Iraq was destroyed after 2003, and it's been going downhill ever since. Was that premeditated, you think?
Well, I think, I'm not an expert on Iraq, but I think the problems in Iraq started when the United States decided to support Saddam Hussein in Saddam Hussein's war against Iran, which I think all told cost about 1 million lives. So we've had a long history in America of feeling that we're protected by 2 oceans and by the geography, to think that it's all right for us to start defying the one principle of the United Nations, which is the right of nations to self-determination, by having our CIA and our deep state and others go around the world and pick winners and looters actually in other countries. We have got to stop doing this, and I think there's a feeling amongst independents that the Poindexters in Washington, D.C., who start talking about American interests in the region. America's interests are inside our boundaries first. Until we have that under control, we shouldn't be on any foreign adventures. And I think that's a hard lesson we're going to learn soon, whether we have a debt crisis or not.
That's a lesson not only for the U.S. Electorate. I mean, it's also a lesson for a lot of, for NATO, for Europe. I mean, Europe ought to stand on their own feet, but they've not been able to stand on their own 2 feet since God knows when. But if you go all the way back to the 80s, I remember, it's a bit... it's a while ago now, but I think Mr. Wolfowitz, a known neocon, was instrumental in helping Saddam procure ingredients for chemical weapons in his war, in the Iraqi-Irani war in '86, I think he was there. And then I remember also '93, when that war was over, on July 2nd, I believe, it was the U.S. ambassador to Baghdad, April Glazier, if I remember correctly, who sort of gave a very ambiguous, to put it mildly, answer to Saddam Hussein, one which she interpreted as a green light to attack and invade Kuwait. And
that was,
yes?
Yeah, that was April Glaspie, and you're referring to an incident that occurred in 1990, right before before Saddam invaded Kuwait. Absolutely. Yeah, these people who inhabit our foreign policy, quotes, establishment or national security establishment, have no interest in promoting lasting peace. When we think about, you mentioned NATO. When we think about NATO, thankfully, after September 11th, 2001, NATO came together in the defense of the United States. We were attacked, and NATO was used to rally support for retaliatory efforts, which I think have destabilized the world. We didn't think clearly about who, in fact, attacked us. And as you say, we misstepped into Iraq and have left the people of Iraq immeasurably worse off today, as are the people in Afghanistan. And the same people, Victoria Nuland and people like her, who have spent their lives destroying security for Americans and for other people. These are people who believe they should have even more power to scramble the world further. And I think sensible people are finally waking up to the fact that just because somebody has the title president, prime minister, or cabinet secretary, or whatever, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily smart. In fact, it can be the opposite. They can be both stupid and arrogant, which is what we have, I think, in our president, our U.S. president. Stupid and arrogant.
I have to take one tangent on that, because last week the Norwegian government announced that they would intensify research on artificial intelligence, and they put down 1 billion Norwegian crowns, which is hardly 100 million US dollars, but still. A friend of mine on Facebook asked, now, is that really smart to fund artificial intelligence? It might show how stupid they are. I mean, a good one. Anyway, let's go back to the 80s. I'm not done with the 80s and the neocons. And you had, because if we have this time span, Reagan and the U.S. aided the Taliban. They aided the Mujahideen to, and the Soviet Union were kicked out of Afghanistan, and then the U.S. helped to overthrow them there, and they built up. Taliban came as a sweeping force, and in the 90s they did what they wanted in Afghanistan. You had the Northern Alliance in some of the northern provinces led by the line from Panjshir. And then all of a sudden, after 9/11, of course, it's proven beyond doubt that these guys behind that operation came out of Afghanistan, were funded by, then we had Osama bin Laden, etc., Zawahiri. And then, to me, the intervention in Afghanistan was doomed from the onset. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my instruction in history is sadly mostly self-taught, though I went to great universities. I didn't study in the faculty there. And I've had the privilege there for over more than 20 years now of trying to get a better understanding of American history. And to do that, you have to read up on UK history, English history. And when you do that carefully, what you see prior to 1776 is decades of abuses of monarchs, abusing the rights of citizens, decades of bloody civil and other wars. And it therefore is a lot easier to understand why the Constitution required the House of Representatives, that is the body closest to the people, to, because you have to get reelected every 2 years, it was required for that body to declare war before we engaged in any foreign adventures. And of course, the folks in our deep state, which was not contemplated in 1776 or 1789, or actually, I would argue, ever adopted lawfully. That deep state has no controls over it, and has engineered ways to get us into countless struggles that turn into either civil wars or actual wars. The situation we find ourselves now in Ukraine, for example, which is not going well. And so you asked me at the start to think through September 11th, 2001. That is a case of blowback, at the very least. That is a case of misadventures perpetrated by shadowy figures in our government and our allies, blowing back and causing us true harm. I mean, I had the luxury of growing up here. I was raised here in Manhattan. I never once felt as if I was vulnerable to attack, even though we're right next to multiple waterways, and you could think you'd be able to sneak a submarine in and do something. But I never felt until September 11th, 2001, that I was actually potentially in a war zone. Now, I don't necessarily fear another attack from the air, certainly not by airplanes, but this city is crumbling around me. It's descending into civil strife and disorder. It is filthy. It has got a mayor who's burning money, supporting immigrants. I mean, it's chaos here.
I mean, we agreed before we started this recording that we would talk about the story that you alerted me on yesterday or the day before yesterday about, which was printed in the Daily Mail. And we'll get that screenshot over to Don, because Don is not far away from you now, and he's helping you out a bit. But it was a story about 6 to 7, 8-year-old kids being taught to steal by their parents in New York, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is an old tactic. It started with drug gangs. That what you do is if you have a juvenile under a certain age, I forget whether it's 18 or even younger than that, if those people are involved in a crime, it doesn't go on their record, and they're not treated as harshly as if they're adults. So what you do is you recruit these young kids to be either lookouts, to warn drug dealers as they're trying to perfect the sale. Oh, don't do it now, cops are coming, undercover cops are coming. Or as you say, to go into businesses and case them out, and even go in and start stealing stuff. And you know, when you think about an 8-year-old kid, you might be tempted to believe that kid is small, but sometimes, you know, if the parents are large, the kid can be 8 but look a lot older. And you're seeing a lot of this. We just Dan and I were just doing something in a nearby place, and this aggressive beggar came in and just hectored everybody. The police, the people in the store had to shout at him to leave, and he just kept on begging in the middle of a store. Ridiculous.
Which is, of course, very intimidating to an ordinary guest who's minding their own, who are minding their own business. One who's not minding his own business, and you spoke about Biden, and of course, I guess that clip must have been all over the world by now, but still, we ought to see about a minute about from this his performance. His shoddy performance in Hanoi, of all places, where he brought up a reference to Vietnam that was tacky, to say the least. Let's have a look at it.
One of my staff members said, remember the famous song, Good Morning Vietnam? Well, good evening, Vietnam. My brother loves having, there's famous lines from movies that he always quotes. And one of them is there's a movie about John Wayne. He's an Indian scout. The Indian looks at John Wayne and points to the Union soldier and says, he's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier. Well, there's a lot of lion, dog-faced pony soldiers out there about global warming, but not anymore. I'm just following my orders here. But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed. We talked about at the conference overall, we talked about stability. We talked about making sure that the third world, the Southern Hemisphere had access to change it, had access. It wasn't confrontational at all. He came up to me and
Thank you, everybody. This ends the press conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you bringing U.S. strategic interests above human rights here in Vietnam?
I've raised it with every person I've met with.
Mr. President, are you worried about your son being indicted, Mr. President?
Good evening, Vietnam is so senseless, and it's proof of it's proof that he is what was the word you used? I can't remember. He's a shadow or whatever. I mean, it's a carcass.
Husk.
Yeah, a husk of a man. And it's time to say good night, Biden. And is it possible that he can survive until 2024 in that position?
I don't think so. I mean, let's just spend a second on Vietnam.
Okay.
In our country, I was just young enough to miss out on being vulnerable to being in the draft. Nonetheless, I had to get a draft number. I had nightmares as a young person. People said that if I were sent to Vietnam, I'd be sent into the middle of a jungle. I've never been in a jungle. They said that that you can never see your enemy. You just one second you're alive, the next second your throat is slit. That didn't seem like a prospect that made a lot of sense to me. And when I asked why were we fighting over there, it was the answer I would get back is to stop the spread of communism. And my attitude was, well, okay, fine. I mean, why do I care about communism in Vietnam? I don't think that's something that I want to risk my life for. So the study, the situation of what happened here is an open wound even today, 50 plus years later, for various reasons. You have the hard left who is against it all the way, and then when we're pushing for us to get out. Then we have the consequences of what happened in Vietnam across Southeast Asia. The number of millions of people were killed after we left. Brutal repression in many places. We have the fact that honorable men and women, men primarily, who were drafted and went into fight in Vietnam and came home, were attacked by fools like John Kerry and others for their patriotism. So you're talking about an open wound even now. And this moron thinks it's funny to refer to a movie about Vietnam as a song and crack jokes. That's not why he was there. I mean, this is somebody who failed so abjectly just in that one trip that for that trip alone, I would impeach and convict and remove him and deny him a pension. Just say, listen, you've stolen enough money. We're going to get to the bottom of how much you and Hunter and others stole. But for this trip alone, I mean, you think about what that could have been. Vietnam is under communist control, the government, but the economy is really doing well because a lot of multinationals want to have two sources of supply in Asia, China and Vietnam. It could have been a very productive and respectful moment. Instead, Bumblehead gets up there, cracks jokes, tries to take a few questions, can't do that, and the press conference is ended, and they play loud jazz music because he has to go off and go to sleep. I mean, it is. I think the man should not be allowed to travel anymore internationally. I mean, he's a danger to the entire world.
He is. You know, a travel ban on Biden would be a good thing. I think we need to put that as our headlight. Biden for travel ban on Biden. And then we haven't spoken about Afghanistan either, Charles. I recall, because I was supposed to go to Afghanistan as a press spokesman from the Norwegian Armed Forces in Afghanistan in 2007. Now, they took away my security clearance for reasons I don't need to go into detail now, but it was also, it had to do with my job in Iraq. Anyway, when I was training for deployment in northern Norway, we had a fairly big exercise getting ready for Afghanistan. And the press spokesman of the Norwegian army in the north came into the into the bunker and said, how is everything? Is everything going smoothly? How was the training? Blah, blah, blah. And when it was my time to speak, I said, you know, we're sending like 600-700 young men, mainly, to Afghanistan. But as far as I've seen, you said very little about why are they going there? What are they defending? And he said, yeah, maybe you're right. Now, who the hell is responsible for that? And I had to tell him, for God's sake, it's the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs more than it is the Norwegian Minister of Defense. And I told him, because I was running a consulting company on my own then, I said, I could help you write a petition to the Minister of Foreign Affairs so we would have a clear message. Why the bloody hell are we in Afghanistan? Of course, no such order ever materialized. And suddenly then Biden pulls the plug on Afghanistan misery and created even more misery. Afghanistan.
Yeah, I've never been there, but initially, of course, the Biden administration tried to blame the exit on Trump. Then they tried to blame it on the military establishment and said, you know, the president wasn't involved. This was the military decisions. Now we have this puff piece of a book out called The Last Politician. And in that book, the author is claiming that actually Biden micromanaged the hasty defeat and exit from Afghanistan. I think proving that former Defense Secretary Robert Gates is absolutely right when he said that every major national security decision Joe Biden has ever made is a disaster. D for disaster. And I question the wisdom of Democrats continuing at this late stage in September 2023, shortly before primary season, continuing to maintain the fiction that Joe Biden is fit for office, given his performance, given questions over his family, I fail to understand why it's in the interest of the Democratic Party to freeze out other potential challengers, and why it makes sense for Democrats not to have a robust primary season on the off chance, which is a rising probability, that Biden's health fails. I mean, his mind has failed for sure. Question is whether his physical health will preclude him actually running in the general election, and if he wins, getting sworn in for re-election. And this is somebody who, there ever was an argument for removal, 25th Amendment removal, it's Joe Biden's daily life in September 2023.
True. I think I saw out of the corner of my eye that some guy on CNN actually said it's time for Biden to go. I mean, when CNN and maybe even MSNBC are saying enough is enough, it should be enough, shouldn't it?
I think so. And I think there's a lot we don't know. You know, Biden has been very effective, and the people backing Biden have been very effective burying scandals. When the important details came out on the laptop, for example, there was a conspiracy to stop the voter from appreciating the severity. We have a piece out by John Solomon going back over the laptop timeline and going back over the Biden issues into early 2015. Serious questions were being raised by investment bank Morgan Stanley about Hunter Biden and Rosemont Seneca and the Biden family. That's in 2015, 5 years before the laptop story. And our mainstream press only now is waking up to the fact that there could be a corruption problem at the core of the Biden family business. Shame on them.
Yeah, I have to, I recall 2015, that was when Hunter and Shokowitz, I think was the name of, Shokowicz was the name of the Ukrainian Burisma guy, and they went on a fishing trip to Norway. And the Norwegian media found it funny that, and they were happily writing, okay, he was there. They were finding the Norwegian fjords nice, and did not ask the obvious question, what are they doing there? What's going on? Not even after the Burisma, not even after, the whole affair blew up. Speaking about the laptop, everybody in the Norwegian media gobbled up the 51 intelligence officers, officials, present and former, tells us that this is a Russian disinformation effort, the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, lie after lie after lie has been discovered.
Well, you're actually unifying this broadcast. We've talked about many different things today, but if we go back to September 11th, 2001, do we really understand why that happened? Who was behind it? Did it make sense to start bombing in Afghanistan? Did we rush into Iraq under false pretenses? Have we rushed into Ukraine under false pretenses? I mean, has the American public, has the general public become averse to discerning the difference between fact and fiction?
Yes.
Do we just want to sit around and accept lies because they come from somebody who has U.S. government representative printed underneath their head as they speak? The public has got to wake up here. We've got to look to Document and Jason Goodman's Crowdsource the Truth and other independent journalists, because the mainstream press is captured. We have to start thinking for ourselves, or the disasters we're going to get into can be even worse than the ones we've experienced since September 11th, 2001.
Definitely. And, I have to mention a meme which is going viral these days, and that's, I'll recall it from I don't have it in writing here, but when there's a problem in the circus, something is wrong in the circus, they always send in the clowns to satisfy the audience, and make the audience think that everything is okay, this is planned, and it goes on saying that, but this circus, something must be really wrong because there's clowns everywhere. And in that regard, Biden is probably the biggest clown, and one who's not a clown, but even know how to crack jokes, is President Trump, Donald J. Trump, who went to South Dakota on Friday and got a roaring welcome and cracked a lot of jokes. For instance, do you want to see me speaking without the teleprompter? I mean, an obvious hint that, and the audience loved it. So we're going to watch just, 45 seconds, 1 minute from his appearance in the Rapid City. And then we'll go on with the show after that.
So this battle that we're in is a battle for all of us, and it's for history. This is historic. This is a big moment in our country because we're either going to go one way or the other. And if we go the other, we're not going to have a country left. We will fight together, we will win together, and then we will seek justice together. We're going to seek justice together.
What a contrast. And as you said, we're entering into the primary season. And no one is halfway near Trump in the polls. Something's going to happen. And I'm sure that we've spoken about that earlier, that obviously the deep state, deep fake state, wants Biden. Their plan is that, Trump will be bogged down in these court cases. But do you think it's even feasible that they will succeed?
I don't think so. I mean, the presidential election is very far away from this moment today. We still haven't, for example, finished the 2023 American baseball season, which seems to go on forever into October, late October. And then once we're through with that, we have a whole nother baseball season to contend with before we get to that election. So it's a long way from today. If we look at the period from, let's say, January 20th, 2009 to the present, it's very clear that Biden's health is failing on an accelerated basis. His physical health, his mental health, he is unlikely, in my judgment, to be viable for many weeks longer, maybe many days longer. And his rivals understand it. Gavin Newsom says he's not running and Kamala's the natural successor. Kamala then appears at some hip hop event and makes a fool out of herself. So all Newsom has to do, I mean, I think he's trying to ignite the draft Newsom movement. And the average American, I don't believe, wants one of these plastic politicians like Newsom or Biden. The average American understands, whether you're a lefty or a righty, that things aren't working. Our country is a lot worse today in 2023 than it was pre-COVID, a lot worse. And these know-it-all politicians, whether in the health field or whatever, have told us with great sincerity and authority to follow a certain course on COVID. And now people are saying, oh, wait a minute, that looks like it was the wrong way to go. Maybe Sweden was right in the beginning. So I think since 2020, we've had the expert class is resembling a lot more like the idiot class. And people are scratching their heads and they're moving away from the uniparty. So let's see what happens. Let's hope we make some sensible decisions. But I don't think the deep state can take down the entire group that supports Donald Trump. They might be able to take Trump down, but there are other people who understand what Trump wants to get accomplished. And should they make the mistake, the deep state, of doing something like that, I think it will ignite even more passions, which on balance will be in favor of the Trump crowd and the Trump legacy.
Interesting. Charles, as I started with, we didn't have a show last week, so this is for last week. And on your note on presidential elections in the U.S. and the primary season about to start in the U.S., I have to tell you that we have municipal elections in Norway ending today where, you could register, or you didn't have to register, but you could vote ahead of time for about a month. And the election booths were open yesterday and today. Will close at 9 p.m. Norwegian time. And it looks pretty certain that for the first time in 99 years, the Labour Party, the Social Democrats of Norway, the Labour Party, will not be the largest party in the elections. That is historic. We have a new broadcast coming up on Thursday, and I think we might have to look at the Norwegian elections, even though they're rather insignificant in the big picture. And we'll have time to find some other topics. I would like to have a closer look at the neocons' influence on the deep state. I think we might find something there, and we'll broach up on that on Thursday for sure. Charles, as always, it's been a pleasure to have you have this show with you. See you shortly. Viewers, make sure that you watch Charles's Twitter account, that you watch his shows with Jason Goodman, Crowdsource the Truth. The addresses will appear maybe on your screen, but definitely in the story that will follow, which is accompanying it on document.news. And tell your friends that there's a small, independent, non-governmental, free, truth-seeking channel called Document. And if you have a chance to send us some money, it will make our studio bigger and better. And maybe we'll get some more people aboard too. PayPal at document.no. Anything you want to add, Charles?
Thanks so much. And let's spend a bit of time today reflecting on the families who had grievous losses 22 years ago on September 11, 2001.
True. Thank you. Have a good evening and a good day to all of you.
Neimen, hei! Har du også antistatlige holdninger? Ja, da har du kommet til rett sted. Da er Dokk-TV noe for deg. Men for at vi skal kunne lage Dokk-TV, så er vi avhengig av din støtte. Vips et bidrag til 63 89 41. Takk.